Good morning, everyone. And I'd like to welcome you to the April 28th meeting of the Special Advisory and Technical Committee of the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority. Can we please get a roll call, please?
Helena Spire. City of Larkspur.
Here.
Thank you. Kentfield Fire.
Here.
Novato Fire District. No Novato. Stinson Beach.
Mike Swayze is here for Novato.
Present.
But he was here. Okay, thank you. Is Stinson Beach? Town of Ross. City of Mill Valley.
Here.
Thank you. County of Marin Fire. Marinwood CSD.
Here.
Sleepy Hollow Fire.
Here.
Thank you. Town of Corte Madera.
Present.
Town of San Anselmo. Town of San Rafael. City of San Rafael, I'm sorry. Inverness Fire. Muir Beach CS.
Here.
Southern Marin Fire.
Here.
Town of Fairfax.
And I didn't hear a here from Jordan Reeser, but he is here.
Jordan's definitely here. Sorry about that. Multitasking.
Jordan, who are you with?
Marin County Fire Department.
Marin County. Thank you. So we have 12. So we do have a quorum. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Can we also get a roll call for our non-voting members, please?
California State Parks.
Morning, Bree Hardcastle's here for State Parks.
Thank you, Bree. Marin County Parks. Let's see, Joan. Marin Water. National Park Service. Pacific Gas and Electric. And ESP, Bill is here. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone. And before we move on to item number 3, just wanted to let the committee know that I extended an invitation for a non-voting membership to PG&E. And we got a confirmation yesterday that Tony Walls is either himself or an alternate will be present whenever they possibly can, which will be a good addition for us. Okay, moving on to item number 3. Do we have any adjustments to the agenda? Seeing none, we will move on to item number 4. It's open time for public expression. This is the time when the public is welcome to address the Advisory Technical Committee at this time on matters that are not on the agenda that are within the jurisdiction of the committee. Please be advised that pursuant to Government Code Section 54954.2, the committee is not permitted to discuss or take action on any matter that is not on the agenda. Comments may be no longer than 3 minutes and should be respectful to the community. And please silence your cell phones during the meeting and mute your microphone when you're not reporting out. Do we have any members of the public that have that would like to express anything?
Is there anyone at this time wishing to speak? Please raise your hand and you'll be noticed. Oh, I see none, but I do need to move Jesse over. He's here. Thank you.
And then also Rob Bastionon's on board. That needs to get moved over.
I just moved him over.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. Okay. So seeing none from open time for public expression, we'll go ahead and bring it back to the committee. Item number 5, planning and program managers report. Ann?
Great, thank you. I'm going to share my screen here. Do we have minutes to
That is on the consent calendar.
Okay. All right. Okay, I'm going to share my screen here. My report is going to be very brief. We have a packed agenda today. As I've reported previously, we are hiring. We have conducted interviews for a management analyst who will be helping with agenda preparation and clerking. As you know, Lori is with us temporarily and we really appreciate her help, but we do need somebody more permanent. So we are in the process of moving into background checks for that position. Vegetation management specialists, the recruitment for that position closed on the 6th. We're going to fill the position for managing the chipper program first. And we have not started interviews for that position yet, but we're excited to dig into those applications. We have a grant specialist position that we have not started recruiting for yet, but that is next on the list. I'd also like to mention that a few of us joined the Association of Environmental Professionals at their annual conference on April 12th. And that is an organization that is really key in tracking environmental regulatory issues, case law around projects and CEQA, et cetera. And we presented on the model for using a JPA for fire fuel reduction at the county scale. And that was really well received. We had a really great time there, having a lot of really interesting conversations, and then hearing also a lot of updates about potential future exemptions that might be useful for some of our work, and permitting issues, case law, things like that. And then in addition, with regard to last year's work plan, fiscal year 21-22, the one that we are currently implementing, we moved 2 projects to the board for approval in April. We do not have any projects on the board agenda for May, but we will have the work plan. So it'll still be a busy agenda for May for the board of directors. And then upcoming meetings for ATC is nothing. We think that this will be the last one for the season for us for building the work plan. And the next operations committee meeting is May 3rd at 10 a.m. And we're hoping to consider the work plan at that meeting. And that's it for my report. Happy to answer questions if there are any.
Thanks, Ann. Do we have any questions for Ann?
Yeah, actually, this is Fred. So I know that we don't have any ATC meetings actually scheduled because, you know, this is the end of the budget, but it might be good to actually just put a tentative placeholder on the calendar down the road a little bit, just so that way, in case we need to, you know, talk about, in case we need to talk about modifications of any of the budgets, or, you know, anything that kind of comes up between now and, I don't know, 8-10 months from now. I'm not sure if that works, but that would be a suggestion.
Okay, thank you. That's something that we can consider. Generally for, do you mean budget adjustments for individual projects or for the work plan as a whole? Because that would be the role of the operations committee.
Yeah, I mean, it'd just be work plan, you know, for the whole. And what I mean by that is, I'm sure everybody is in the same boat. There's a ton of grant money out there. And so some of these projects we might be able to fund with grant money, and then, you know, we might be able to use the MWPA money for other projects, you know, in the future. So I just wanted, there might be some changes. I just thought putting a placeholder in there in case we need to discuss anything that comes up in the future might be a good idea.
Okay, thanks for that. Let's explore that maybe via email, and Fred, why don't you and I check in on that offline also? Thank you.
Sounds great, thank you.
And quick question, based on the timing of when the plan goes to the the board, if the board had revisions, there is time in theory to bring it back for a second meeting if it had to be. Is that accurate?
The work plan needs to be adopted by the end of May. By the board.
I was thinking June.
So if there are, so we'll be providing that draft work plan to the board, and the board has seen generally the list of projects that are included in maps for each of the zones. So they have a good idea already what's being proposed, but it would be good to reach out sooner rather than later regarding the work plan so that there's time to react before the May 19th board meeting.
Yeah, so if we have any changes, we've got about 3 weeks to make those proposals. It starts getting into a real tight framework or time frame right now. And I think hopefully next year, I think it's one of your items coming up is making adjustments to our meetings to where it becomes a little more regular.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the agenda items today to discuss future schedule for next year.
Yeah. Perfect. Any other questions or comments for Ann?
And this is John Hanley from Sleepy Hollow. I want to make sure this is new work. And I'll give you an example. If an entity, a city, this isn't to supplement their work that was previously done with the city budget. This is new work. Am I correct in that thought process, or am I making myself clear?
For the work plan that we're developing now.
Yes. For instance, if an entity grazed for the last 4 years, this is not to supplement that's been previously done. This is new areas. What I'm getting at is, I don't want to see the city not budget what was previously budgeted and use our funds for that. Do you see where I'm getting at?
Yeah, you're right, John. It's MWPA was designed for additional funding on top of the work that we're completing, and it's not to take the place of.
Yes, and as part of the work plan development, implementing or inputting proposals for the next work plan, you do need to commit to not supplanting. So that is exactly what you're talking about there, John.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up.
Okay, we'll go ahead and bring it back. Moving on to item number 6 is the consent calendar. This is an opportunity for the public to comment on the consent items, to see if they want to hold or open up for discussion, or any members within the committee can pull this item for discussion. On the consent calendar is the minutes from the April 6th meeting. Do we have anyone from the public wishing to pull this item for discussion?
I see none at this time.
Okay, bringing it back. I will like to entertain a motion to approve the consent calendar. Do we have a motion?
So moved. Yeah.
Okay, so first was
Landon
David,
moved.
second Larry. So first was Muir Beach, second Kentfield. Then can I get a roll call, please?
Yes, thank you. Let's see. Fires absent. City of San Rafael.
Yes.
City of Larkspur.
Yes.
County of Marin.
Yes.
Kentfield Fire.
Yes.
Muir Beach.
Yes.
Novato Fire.
Yes.
Sleepy Hollow.
Yes.
Southern Marin.
Yes.
Stinson Beach.
Yes.
Town of Corte Madera.
Yes.
Town of Fairfax is absent. Town of Ross.
Yes.
Town of San Anselmo's absent. City of Mill Valley.
Yes.
Marinwood CSD.
Yes.
Inverness Fire is absent. Passes by unanimous vote of those attending. Thank you.
Thank you. Going on to item number 7 is our discussion items. Under A is proposed modification to next year's work plan development process. Do we have a report?
Yes, thank you. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I wanted to end the season of work plan development with, while everything is fresh in our minds, with a discussion on what we can do next year to improve the process. So I'd love to list off the things that I was thinking and get some ideas from you all. And those are ideas that we can incorporate into next year's process. And as Ruben was mentioning, one of the items of discussion is really the schedule and making sure that the last minute crunch isn't quite so intense, and so build in a little bit more, front load some of that work, even more than we did this year. So some of the ideas include inviting our land management agencies to present at our kickoff meeting that starts us off, say in December, before we really get going. And that's really to get an idea for what their internal processes and timelines are so that we can incorporate that as we move ahead and start proposing projects that overlap public lands. I know that Marin County Parks and Open Space would have liked to present on that topic today, but wasn't able to. So Jim Chayka is going to present to the Operations Committee on the 3rd. And their internal timeline really requires collaboration very early in the process. And so he's even suggesting maybe he's going to need to reach out to member agencies even earlier than December to just kind of get a feel for what types of projects would overlap their lands that they steward. Additionally, I'd like to invite the Operations Committee next year to present their strategy to the ATC. So this year, the Operations Committee came up with a general set of strategies, and I'd like them to deliver that message to the ATC and really explain what they'd like to see. I'd also like to dig into the web portal. We've made a lot of adjustments and tweaks as we go. Thanks to all of you for providing your input and sharing any bugs or improvements or ideas that you have. One of the things that was a challenge this time around was downloading proposals from the portal into a usable form. And so we've been working on that. I think we've got it pretty much dialed in. So we'll continue to work on that to make sure that we don't miss any proposals, like we missed a Southern Marin Fire proposal a couple of times this time around. We'll be continuing to work with legal counsel on the Brown Act to make sure that everything we do complies with the Brown Act through the web portal. That's a big topic of conversation, and it'll continue to be, but we'll make sure to work with legal counsel to balance that need to collaborate with all of the legal requirements we have. We'd also like to explore using Marin Map as a tool to map our projects. And because that's a tool that our member agencies are already using, we'd like to incorporate that into the work plan development process. I'd like to set regular repeating meeting dates earlier in the season. This time around, we weren't able to do that because of various conflicts with various folks. And so I have some tentative dates here that seem to work for the chairs of both the ATC and the Operations Committee. So sharing those on the screen now. There are a lot of Thursday meetings that are set throughout the month. So I'd like to explore a Wednesday meeting for the ATC. 10 to noon seem to work generally for folks. So the first Wednesday of each month is what I'm proposing right now. Trying to get a feel for any repeating meetings that would take folks away, or any regular conferences, things like that. So let me know if I missed anything, but this is the tentative set of dates right now. And these are in the staff report also, so you don't have to write down what's on the screen right now. For Operations Committee, since Wednesdays seem to be better than Thursdays, we'll go with a Wednesday date as well, the second Wednesday of each month. And then we'll need an additional date going beyond April into May. I'm going to skip ahead to proposed deadlines here for work products as we develop the work plan. I'd like to front load some of the deadlines and some of the work a bit more so that we have more time to react to not only the JPA-wide proposal budgets, but all of the draft proposals, so we get a better idea for geographically where projects are being proposed, and there's more opportunity for collaboration across zones. So initial drafts for the JPA-wide proposals would be March 1st. Initial drafts for member agency proposals would be March 15th. And that's because there's a lot of fine tuning that happens after those initial proposals are uploaded. The rest of March would be adding those proposals and reacting also to draft budget numbers. And we'd have a due date of the end of March for that. And then April is really about kind of fine tuning and creating that budget. So the Operations Committee would of course take the reins on that as that is their function, and work to complete a budget and work plan in April for May adoption by the board. And then circling back to the portal, there's an idea that Todd actually came up with, which I thought was a really good one. And that is to, within the portal, while budget numbers are still kind of a question mark, it does take time to figure out what our projected revenue is going to be. Sometimes all of that doesn't quite line up. So Todd suggested having a place in the portal to assign a percentage of your budget to your proposals, particularly core. So if you have 6 proposals in the core, you can assign each one a percentage of your core budget rather than trying to assign a specific dollar figure and then go back and adjust later on in the process. So now I'd like to open it up for other folks to share their thoughts and ideas. This is just a short list, and so I'd like to take a couple of minutes at least to discuss any of your ideas about how to make next year's process go smoothly.
So, Anne, I totally appreciate all the work that you put into this. I know it's been quite an endeavor for you. I think that I would just suggest just looking at the proposed deadlines, just maybe possibly spacing it out a little bit more. And the reason I say that is because we're also internally doing budgeting and all kinds of other things too, and running projects. So it might be if maybe we back it up a little bit more, and that would give us like 3 weeks. Or in between these, that might be helpful. But that's the only comment I have. And again, I really appreciate all the work you put into this.
Thanks, Fred.
Jordan.
I mean, just to kind of tag on to what Fred was saying there, I think, is there an opportunity maybe to have? I don't know what the status of the portal is going to be as far as it's going to be open year round, if it's going to be closed, but I think maybe where some improvement could be made, especially with the ATC group, is we really haven't had much discussion about projects, right, and kind of collaborative stuff. We just kind of been presented stuff and kind of all nod our head and say, okay, sounds good. If we had some opportunity to start maybe inputting some of these projects at an earlier date into the system, not necessarily to start capturing the budget piece and implementation, but just for that, hopefully as we extend out into some of the open space lands. I don't want to use the open space. I should say the wild lands, right? Not to classify based on ownership. But we would just have a little more opportunity to discuss some of these and talk about it, and kind of have a little more collaboration amongst us. So maybe I would just suggest that. I don't know what the plan is for the portal being open. If we can start in essence putting in projects for next year in August or now, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks, Jordan. One of the things that we could do is create kind of a public portion of the portal so that the more collaborative conversations can happen earlier. Due to the Brown Act, we can't, we have to be careful about how we make that work. But we could create a way to make those ideas or, you know, dots on a map or initial project descriptions more public. And so that's something I can talk with legal counsel about. And as a note, as of yesterday, we did take all of the proposals. We'll get into this later. We did take all the proposals and make them public online so that you can go to our website and see the proposals as they are in the work plan portal right now. Go ahead, Quinn.
Yeah, I think the first two comments were totally agree with them. My two things were, and I mean, we never know exactly the dates, obviously, but some of the bigger granting entities like CAL FIRE, if we can kind of incorporate and think about those kind of known dates when we're thinking about our work plan, kind of to the earlier point about the impact that might have. And then specific, it's kind of a chicken or an egg thing in terms of budget before projects and projects before budget, but I know that was certainly a point of frustration this year to put a ton of effort into creating a work plan based on last year's numbers and then to have to put a bunch more effort into figuring how to scale that back. And so if there is a way at least to have rough numbers earlier in the process so that we're not, you know, doing undue work and realizing there is a balancing thing that's going to happen more towards the end, but maybe rough budget before March projects and then balanced budget, I think would be really helpful.
Thanks, Quinn.
Todd?
I would first say thank you to Anna. You know, I appreciate you considering that suggestion that we input percentages rather than a dollar amount, and I think that will partly address what Quinn just brought up also.
I don't know how, if there's something happening.
But I have two other suggestions for the process that I think would be really valuable. If we look at the history of how the application input process was created, last year before we had any staff at MWPA, or during the first year's proposal cycle, Lynn Osgood was tasked with putting together a paper application form, and it was based on a CAL FIRE grant application. And some of the questions have continued to be carried over from that initial form that we created, and frankly are really unnecessary. Listing the communities at risk, the communities, addressing whether the communities at risk that we've just listed are noted in the CWPP or another document. Some of those questions are simply not necessary at this level. We're within our own organization. This is not a competitive grant process. It's a proposal process with an entire ATC and operations committee available to review the proposals. It's just extra work for us to list the communities adjacent to our proposals. We can find that out based on GIS mapping and the maps and other information. That said, I think there's also an opportunity to streamline the process. If we were able to develop some model scopes of works for different types of projects, I think this may be a little bit beyond what we're discussing right now, but it would be part of the proposal process. The ATC ought to be tasked with creating model scopes of work, and then when we select a project, there would be an option for a drop-down list, and we would be committing to follow the scope of work, which is already been reviewed by the MWPA, already in line with the ESP, best management practices. Potentially in some cases already have had some initial environmental compliance review, at least by the teams, to ensure that we're minimizing impact and we've got a good scope. If we were to select a scope of work from a drop-down menu, maybe half a dozen, I'm envisioning, potential scopes: roadside vegetation, defensible space work, shaded fuel break type work, and commit to working from those scopes, it would dramatically streamline the proposal process, probably streamline the environmental compliance going forward. I think there's potential cost savings involved in that. And I also recognize that there needs to be an other option for concepts, proposals, projects that just don't fall into those neat categories. But I look at our proposals, and we've proposed about a half a dozen different types of projects countywide, and each of our agencies making those proposals has written those things in a slightly different way. That's just wasteful, I think, of all of our time and probably a lot of our financial resources going forward. So.
Thanks so much. Great suggestions.
Sorry,
Ruben.
No, you're okay.
Yeah, so along those lines too, what might be kind of helpful as well is to kind of get an idea specifically of what the Citizens Oversight Committee would like to see as far as, as far as, reporting out or what they need. And so that we can include some of that material in these proposals. So when we update them, it'll be there and they won't have to, email us all out, ask us for specific stuff.
Thanks, Fred.
Mike?
Thanks. I just want to echo Todd's comments. I really like what he was saying about trying to get some uniformity, some standardized practices across all of the agencies. I think that's important for us going forward, that we're in alignment, but also, yeah, it really helps with the application process if we don't have to do the creative writing effort. And also I like the idea of starting sooner. I mean, there's other land management agencies besides county parks, and we're all dealing with them in a regular manner, but there are other folks, and having that conversation sooner and more time to hear what their projects are and how we can work together. I think that would be very useful.
Thanks, Mike.
Bill?
Yeah, hi. And you mentioned the portal projects recently being made public. And I think that would be a valuable thing to think about next year, is maybe identifying those points at which various information would be made public. Thanks.
Thank you, Bill.
Any other comments, questions? Okay, seeing none, I'd like to go ahead and open up to the public to see if they have any comments or questions.
At this time, is anybody in the public wishing to speak on this item? Please raise your hand. I see none at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and bring it back to the committee. Thank you, Ann. There's definitely a lot of good work and a lot of hard work going into it. I think these are a lot of good suggestions that are being added that I think will improve our program going into the 23-24 work plan. I know Todd and I have had several conversations internally, and I think at least our consensus is if we're able to have some of those standardized language for similar to projects, which would similar be like a programmatic type of EIR. So it's already, say if we're doing roadside vegetation, the EIR is already done as long as you stay within that scope of work. And if you go outside that scope of work, I think it'd be the responsibility of the individual agency to then go ahead and maybe go above and beyond on the compliancy side of it. But it will definitely streamline our process and make it a little easier for each member agency moving forward. At least those are our thoughts internally.
Thanks so much.
Okay. Direction for us is, do we need to take a vote on this, or is it just more of a discussion?
No, just a discussion, and I'll incorporate all of your ideas and follow up with some of you as needed to make sure that we build next year's process bigger and better.
Perfect. Thank you, Ann. Much appreciated. Okay, move on to item number 8 on the agenda is action items. 8A is ecologically sound practices partnership document. Do we have a report?
Yes, I'm going to share my screen here, and we have discussed this document previously, and including at the last ATC meeting on the 6th. So I'm not going to go into a ton of detail here, but a quick overview, you know, as for anyone who's not familiar or who's new, the Ecologically Sound Practices Partnership really came together before the MWPA existed, and that was to work with environmental groups before Measure C went to the voters and really think through how to collaborate long-term with the environmental community. So a lot of representatives from different environmental organizations took part, and were invited to come up with kind of some recommendations in terms of how we operate on, especially in vegetation management projects, but in a variety of different arenas, and that includes defensible space and carbon management also. About a year ago, the ESP representatives delivered a draft document to the MWPA. We took a look at it, we reviewed it with our environmental consultants and legal counsel to think through how this fits with our regulatory and legal landscape. So how does it fit within the JPA language, within allowable expenses under Measure C, et cetera. And we have gone back and forth with ESP with ideas for how to edit. ESP considers and works with their membership. We've done, it's been actually a really great collaborative process, kind of thinking these things through and working through some of the challenges and some of the expectations around this. So we continued to work with the ESP, brought the document to the ATC a couple of times, once in February for kind of initial input. We did receive input and some potential edits. I went back to work with the ESP folks to think through some of those edits to the document. We did make edits, and that document is included in the staff report or in the agenda as an attachment. One additional edit was made after the last time you reviewed the document, and I'll show you that in a moment. But generally, the idea here is to create a document that's kind of a living, flexible document that's guidance for the MWPA. It is something that would go through the ATC, be reviewed by the operations committee, and then be considered at the board level to be adopted as guidance, but not a legally binding document, a living document that would be adjusted over time as needed. So here's an example of one of the edits. This is the last edit that was made. It was made after our April 6th ATC meeting. And that was to add a little bit of flexibility to this particular sentence under the defensible space section on page 19. And that edit is to mow annual grasses and weeds to follow requirements set forth in local fire codes, generally 3 to 4 inches in most jurisdictions. And that was to address some concern over making sure that the document defers to local fire agencies, defensible space inspections when it comes to defensible space related recommendations, rather than substituting the ESP document for those defensible space recommendations. Some of the other edits included how the document would be used. So it's a guiding document, not necessarily legally binding, but reflects the values of the environmental community and how to incorporate that into MWPA's work. So today, the ATC would just be recommending that the operations committee review the document and that the board consider it in the future for adopting as a guiding document. So that's the recommendation and the action that can be taken today. And we have a representative from ESP, Bill Carney, who's here in place of Belle. So I'm going to invite Bill to say a few words if you have some additional thoughts to share.
Sure. Thanks, Ann, and thanks very much for your work and everybody's work in getting this to the point where we are. It's really great that we've come that far. And, you know, it has been a long and very involving process. It's gone through meeting after meeting after meeting. And we were divided into, the ESP partnership was divided into 3 subject areas. And so these were meetings that allowed for a lot of participation. I think probably upwards of 50 people going over these documents as they developed and really focused down and having a lot of time to talk and work out the details and to assure the alignment with the purposes and practices of the MWPA. So it's great to have gotten additional improvements along the way through this committee, and we welcome that. We do see this going forward as an evolving document, improving over time, and with experience as we go through this. And even now, it seems to us to be a model for incorporating natural elements and concerns into fire reduction work. So thanks very much. And, you know, we're happy to engage in any further discussion here this morning.
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you, Ann. Do we have any questions for Ann or Bill regarding the ESP document?
Less of a question, more of just thanks. I really appreciate the additional work over the last couple of months. I know we had some concerns about, and Ann hit on pretty much all of them and kind of her comments in terms of making sure that we defaulted to the code, and we really treated this as a guiding document, and just really appreciative of those changes. And, you know, I think that there'll be, I think like anything as the MWPA evolves, everyone's trying to figure out their role and their responsibility and where they can really contribute the most. And, you know, I think where this document started versus where it ended up has certainly shifted, and as has ESP's role. And I just want to acknowledge that and thank you all for the kind of mutually, just the work has been really helpful the last couple of months, and I appreciate the clarifications that went into it.
Great.
Any other questions or comments from the committee? Seeing none, can we go ahead and open up to the public to see if we've got any members of the public that would like to comment?
Yes, thank you. Is there anybody in the public wishing to comment on the ESP document? Please raise your hand. I see none at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. We'll bring it back to the committee. Just on my end, I wanted to thank both Bill and then extend the gratitude to Belle. I know she's been present and put a lot of work into this, and it just shows the collaboration between the fire agencies, local municipalities, and our partners at the ESP group, and to try to provide this document that, like Quinn said, is just a guiding document on what the best management practices are. So I think there's a misperception out there that when we do fuel management or fuel breaks, our intent is to moonscape a hillside or moonscape the environment, which is not the intent. For us, a lot of it is to restore its natural habitat, and some of it is removing a lot of our invasive species. So being able to have this document to both assist us and to help educate the community of what our goal is, I think it will definitely show the success of the MWPA. So thank you, Bill. With that, I think what you're looking for, Ann, is a motion to go ahead and move this document to the Operations Committee for consideration.
Yes.
Okay. Can I have a motion to accept the ESP best practices document and move it forward to the Operations Committee?
A motion that we move it forward to the Operations Committee as you stated.
Seconded.
Second.
Okay, so first is Southern Marin Mill Valley. Second would be Todd Lando with Corvadera. Can I get a roll call, please?
Yes, thank you. Belina Spire is absent. So City of San Rafael,
Yes.
I believe Bolinas is on board now.
Oh, are they here now? Okay, so Bolinas, Fire.
Aye.
Thank you. City of Larkspur,
Yes.
County of Marin,
Yes.
Kentfield Fire,
Yes.
Muir Beach,
Yes.
Novato Fire District,
Yes.
Sleepy Hollow,
Yes.
Southern Marin,
Yes.
Benson Beach,
Yes.
Town of Corte Madera,
Yes.
Town of Fairfax, I have as absent. Town of Ross,
Yes.
Town of San Anselmo, I have absent. City of Mill Valley,
Yes.
Marinwood CSD,
Yes.
and Inverness, I have as absent. Passes by unanimous vote of those attending. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori, and thank you, everyone. We'll go ahead and move on to action item 8B, which is update on the project proposals submitted for the fiscal year of 22-23 work plan. Do we have a report, Ann?
Yes, thanks. I'm going to share my screen, and then I'm going to ask Mark to help present this item. So today, what we're going to do is take a look at the overview of the proposals that are part of the draft 22-23 work plan. In a previous meeting, we went through in more detail about what is being proposed for each zone. So we won't take that level of detail today, but we are going to provide an overview on some of the changes that have happened since the last time we met on the 6th. So we'll discuss the budget, especially changes having to do with the JPA-wide projects, and then we'll go through some of the other projects, spreadsheets, maps. I'll show you the web portal that's visible to the public online now, and we'll take a moment to do that before we consider whether or not we're going to vote to move these forward to the operations committee to finalize the work plan and finalize the budget. So Mark, would you mind taking over and presenting on the budget, please?
You bet. Good morning, everybody. And this is the JPA wide core proposals. And it was the one, where appropriately there was a lot of concern about the growth that it had and how that impacted the individual zones for the core budgets. And so on the right-hand side of this column, you see the reductions that were proposed to the JPA-wide core proposals based on the conversation that we had both with you guys and with the operations committee and in the finance ad hoc of the operations committee. So the coastal zone environmental compliance process has been completely zeroed out and moved into the overall compliance for the entire JPA. And you can see that we also dropped that by $250,000. So there's a net decrease of $350,000. Public education, primarily driven by Fire Safe Marin, is at $988,000. And there are details for each one of the individual projects, but that was one of the #1 marching orders that we did get from the operations committee, was to increase our pub ed. The knowledge and attitude survey is penciled in at $75,000. The direct assistance with staff to support the finance ad hoc for this operations felt that direct assistance should be more of an effort at the local level rather than the JPA-wide core. So that was reduced by $860,000. We dropped the fire detection camera coordination from 60 to 30,000. I think it was all well supported that defensible space inspection subscription be a core project, so that stayed in the budget line. Grant programs with staff to support was dropped by $245,000, but that's also with the acknowledgement that we will have approximately $400,000 of rollover from this fiscal into next. So we'll be looking at a grant program of about $650,000. And part of the concern from the finance ad hoc subcommittee was that we have so much unspent from this year, perhaps we should be showing more success in our grant programs before we really take some aggressive growth to it. So that was the reasoning behind that. The Zonehaven subscription, we had built in potential increase in costs, but we dropped that back out. So we're at 75,000. I discussed environmental compliance already. And one thing I want to talk about that though, is that if we didn't have that in here, that would make this, the JPA wide 3.75 million, which is close to last year's, but then you would have environmental compliance built into each of your projects. So it's kind of a wash, but we will also be looking at any of the projects that you guys have proposed this year that the environmental compliance was already done from last year. I should say, you know, this work plan compared to last work plan. And so that could even further drop the costs of the environmental costs. And then we can proportion that back into the 5 regions. Operational costs, we dropped it by 200,000 to 400,000. Let me detail what those exactly what those operational costs are. It would be 125,000 for rent, 20,000 for tenant improvements for the location. And one of the things I want to bring up with that is that we will have a large meeting space, so we'll be able to host all of our 17-member committees at that large meeting space. But also for if you guys have to get together in a large group, that meeting room will also be available for that. We'll also have a couple of hoteling type workstations within the office area that if any of yourselves or your vegetation management specialists need to come and coordinate with MWPA staff, we'll have space for that to occur as well, and centrally located at the Common. So fairly easy for most agencies to get to. Continuing with the breakdown of the operational costs, continued website and work portal or work plan portal improvements, 20,000. Our communications plan, then that's outside of Fire Safe Marin, that would be our annual work plan, strategic plan, our social media work that we do on our own is scheduled at 45,000. We will be getting 2 Grizzly Corps fellows again this year. So we have 40,000 set aside for that. We have 25,000 set aside for training, and that's not just for MWPA staff, that we can make that training also available for our member agencies. Research development and new emerging opportunities, we have 25,000 set aside, and then we have $100,000 contingency set aside. So if we have project overruns, whether it's JPA wide or within the 5 regions, we'll be able to have some contingency funding in there. The CHIPPR program and staff supports 1.25 million, which is just a slight increase from last year. We have the regional wildfire disaster preparedness coordinator. That is 1/3 of the total for 45,000. We dropped the UC Master Gardeners from 125,000 to 75,000 because of unspent revenue from this fiscal, because the position wasn't filled until well into the year. So we were able to drop that by using last year's salary savings. The risk reduction tracking is a very exciting project, in my opinion. That's the project that'll be looking at all of our D-space home hardening work, our evac route clearing, and our shaded fuel breaks, and giving us a scientific quantifiable rating of the actual risk reduction that we've done for our communities. It'll also identify where we're having our most successes and where we may be struggling, and that can help us modify our work plans. And then the evacuation risk assessment for 350,000 to bridge the just under 900,000 that we have now set aside for it to the 1.25 million for the overall project. But we continue to seek out grant opportunities. We're fairly confident we'll be able to get grant funding for that. And so if we do get that grant funding, that 350 would be filtered back into the 5 regions at the proportional levels. Next slide, Ann. And then so with the JPA wide monies that were reduced, that increased these numbers, and I believe Ann has shared them with you as your targets for your projects. So that estimate that I gave you several months ago of being about 2/3 of last year, I think we landed pretty close to that. And that's all I have.
Thanks, Mark. I'm going to take a moment to share with you. So here's the slide. We're going to take a look at our website and the portal, which is now public. We're going to take a look at some maps showing project locations, and then I'm going to take a look, or I'm going to share with you a spreadsheet containing the proposals for now, the list of proposals. So to take a look at our website first, are you able to see my the MWPA home screen?
Yes.
Great. So if you click in the upper left-hand corner, and this is true for the public or folks who have a login for the portal, and you click on JPA portal, that takes you to this page, which includes the proposals that have been submitted thus far. And that should be nearly all the proposals. We'll actually have one or two added before it hits the operations committee, but I'll talk about that in a moment. So you can choose either to see all zones or by zone or the JPA-wide projects. So for example, if you click on San Rafael and you scroll down, then you get a list of all of the proposals in the San Rafael zone, and note that the proposal codes will be updated. And then if you click on the ID number to the left, then you get to see the full proposal, the text as it appears in the portal. So this is a way, you know, Jordan's suggestions say for encouraging more collaboration across zones earlier in the process. Making things public is a great way to do that, so that per the Brown Act, we're able to collaborate more thoroughly and earlier in the process. So this is now live and will be updated. This banner at the bottom is too big and it covers up some of the text, and there are a couple other things that'll be modified, but it's live now. And so that was a big update in terms of kind of our transparency and making sure that we are bringing in the public as much as possible and daylighting what we're doing. We have a series of maps that show generally where projects are located for this next fiscal year. This is an overview of all of the projects. Some of them are indicated by dots because they don't really have a geographic location, like defensible space inspections, etc. These maps include one map per zone as well. This is the Central Marin Zone map, again, with pins to indicate certain types of projects. You can see the Greater Ross Valley Shaded Fuel Break in yellow, and polygons to represent more kind of vegetation management projects, and a list of associated projects. So there's a key here. So moving on to the next zone in West Marin, same deal. All of the projects that are currently in the web portal are here, including roadside vegetation management, which is this yellow polygon that's labeled number 5. It's not actually such a large project area as that. That's roadside vegetation management. And the projects listed here. So Novato zone is looking like this. You can see the Greater Novato Fuel Break planning and implementation in kind of that aqua color, that linear, and the polygon that's labeled number 5, with all of the projects listed right here. For San Rafael zone, we've got a number of projects distributed throughout the zone that are listed here. All of these maps will be made available to you. We'll add them to the agenda. They're updated as of literally about an hour ago, but they'll be added to the agenda and made available to everyone, and they'll be part of the final work plan as well. In the Southern Marin Zone, we've got a good distribution of projects here as well as some linear shaded fuel breaks, including number 8 there. And all the projects are listed here, as well as their budget source. And then we have JPA-wide projects just listed, not actually mapped because it would be a very large polygon. That would be the same for all of them. And then the next thing I'd like to share with you is a spreadsheet. So these budget numbers are draft and they do not need to be resolved today, but this is a good idea for where we are in terms of our proposals that are included in the fiscal year 22-23 draft work plan. This is everything that is proposed or with some notes on modifications that are currently underway. So for example, now that we have kind of budget numbers for core projects, some of the budgets will be adjusted to make sure that surpluses and deficits will be addressed. So looking at Central Marin Zone, it's separated by member agency, and then also all the local and DSpace proposals are in one table for each member agency. And in my notes column here, most of the notes are just a reminder to modify project budgets to ensure that those budgets are zeroed out and all the funds are used. So the green numbers are money that's left on the table and could be incorporated into proposal budgets. Some of these, Todd, I'll be circling back with you on some of these questions for Central Marin Core proposals. So we'll chat more about that. It doesn't need to be resolved today, but should be resolved for the Operations Committee. In West Marin, we are adding a defensible space and home hardening evaluation and inspection program to use the DSpace funds. So we'll be adding those details into the portal shortly. Potentially omitting a project based on budget considerations in row 79 here, the Woodacre Ridge Perimeter Fuels Reduction Project. But again, that's not entirely finalized. I know Novato is working on some additional budget adjustments just based on local DSpace and core funding amounts available, and they're working with me to update those numbers. San Rafael will be finalizing their numbers as well. They have some surplus that they can incorporate back into their proposals. Marinwood will be adding a defensible space program project to use the $68,000 DSpace that is coming to them. Mill Valley will be further adjusting their budgets to use that remaining $9,000 in DSpace funds. So generally speaking, these numbers are, looking really good. They're getting close to being done. Just some minor internal work with member agency staff to make sure that the operations committee has the input that they need to make decisions about what the budget should look like as a final product. So generally speaking, I think we're really looking good in terms of proposals in the work plan. We'll continue to fine tune details and fix typos and make sure that all the numbers add up in the end. And we'll be working with the operations committee, especially on that budget, and working with Marinwood and Marin County Fire to finalize details on those last two remaining proposals. And I think we ended up maybe around between 150 and 120 proposals in the end once we deleted some duplications, and we'll add a couple more in the next day or so. So, I think the last thing I want to say is just a big thank you to everyone for all of your hard work, for creating those project descriptions, the job descriptions, for providing your input wherever there were questions about the portal or the process. Whenever you had ideas about how to make the portal better, that was really great, and I really appreciate it. And I'm looking forward to moving this on to the operations committee so we can finalize it and finalize the budget. But in the meantime, I'm happy to answer questions or, have a discussion about ideas, thoughts, concerns, and messages to convey to the operations committee moving forward.
Thanks, Anne. A lot of hard work going on the back side. Any comments or questions for Ann regarding the work plan? Quinn?
Yeah, appreciate it. Second the effort. The adjustments to the budget are certainly helpful. It was a little concerning, I think, because there was a couple different discussions back and forth to see the direct assistance program totally cut. And I think the rationale I heard from the ops committee was that that could be better like managed local. My challenge is I cut my own direct assistance program to get my numbers down. So now I have, which that's where that surplus will go, right? And so I think it's just kind of that balancing game. But I think one of the things we had all kind of agreed to is from like a cost benefit analysis, we could get more out of the direct assistance than the grants. Like when we looked at the dollar figure per homes better adapted. So that's just kind of my thought there. But I think as more, and I know I'm, have a little more experience with managing that program, and maybe as more jurisdictions try it locally, it'll maybe something we can revisit next year. Geez, there was like so much that just got covered. Did we ever
respond a little bit to your direct? Yeah. So that is something that the operations committee felt if we needed to cut, let's cut that because it's new for the MWPA to manage. Seems like local member agencies would be able to handle that. One of the things we did modify though with the existing grants program was a bit of flexibility to directly hire crews to do some of that work under that existing structure for low income residents. So one of the reasons to have that direct assistance program is so that residents don't need to pay upfront and then get reimbursed. And we wanted to still address that need to some extent. So we are exploring kind of a mini pilot within the existing grants program. Go ahead, Quinn.
No, that's good to hear. That's kind of what we ended up doing, was just kind of clumping, just like called it a resident assistance program and clumped grants, direct assistance, and like high hazard targeting all into one, just so we had that flexibility based on supply and demand, quite frankly, as the year went on. So that's helpful to hear.
And if I can just tag on, we're going to have to show success in our grant program, and having 400,000 unspent from last year is not creating that confidence of success. And granted, there were 6 months of time that we didn't spend. So that's part of it. And it's a new and emerging program for our residents to tap into. But if we start showing success, then we can get some traction and start adding items like the direct assistance to JPA-wide.
And what we're hearing is that if you have larger award amounts, then you get more interest generated and people find it more worthwhile to fill out the application and go through the process. So we anticipate that, along with additional outreach and social media work, and I think we'll see a more successful program this next year.
Yeah, and we've had obviously very in-depth conversations about the grant program too. And there's pros and cons to that too, because some of those big awards, how much community risk reduction is really happening versus, so, but yeah, it's worth trying out, I think, for sure. I know one of the things that I think we brought up at the last ATC meeting was when we kind of ultimately came down to these questions of like, what are our criteria for JPA-wide projects? Has that been flushed out anymore kind of going into this updated budget, or is that something we can definitely make sure we have very well spelled out going into next year? Because the ultimate concern for myself, and I don't want to speak for Chief White, but we've had conversations about this, is the trend that we might be looking at in terms of how much money kind of goes back into the core control, and that we don't want to see an ongoing trend where we see less and less zone control. And so I think setting those JPA-wide criteria is going to be really important to help stabilize that and stabilize expectations there.
Well, I mean, the criteria is in general, if the project is going to overlay the entire JPA, then that was going to be a JPA-wide project. I mean, it's if it's available for all 5 zones, it's.
Okay. And that might be where the coastal zone switch happened and some of those other kind of tweaks based on that. I kind of already mentioned, I know I said last meeting, like we'd already adjusted our budget. Now I'll readjust it, which is totally fine. I'm glad I'm adjusting it up this time instead of back down. there is, and I know the ops committee gave specific direction on some of this, but I just want to throw this out there that I do have some concern that as fire agencies and as the taxing entities, we're all being asked to reduce our budget, and non-taxing entities and third-party kind of partners, if you will, and programs, Chipper and PubEd specifically, are not being asked to cut those programs. And so again, I think that's just a trend we need to be really careful about, that, and maybe there's some additional oversight we look at. And I think going back to year one, it made 100% sense to put so much money into public education, and Fire Safe Marin was so ready to roll while the rest of the JPA was kind of figuring stuff out. But I think as we get more into these planning projects and these big large scale projects, we need to still be able to have that money to put onto the groundwork and things like that. So just kind of a statement there. I don't, I just want to be careful about what that trend ends up being long-term. So appreciate the efforts to get those numbers down. And, I think we're somewhat in the middle, which is probably the best we're going to get at this point. So appreciate it. And we'll make those adjustments, and I'll be in touch and to get those numbers cleaned up a little bit for you.
Thanks, Quinn.
Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, this is John Hanley. We've spoken about a lower income and helping them out. I seem to remember reading that also nonprofits are given a special look as well in the literature that was voted on. Am I correct in that? They're two of the same.
John, are you talking about Fire Safe Marin?
Yes.
Yes, so it was determined early on that rather than create a public education department within the MWPA, we would work with Fire Safe Marin as the established Fire Safe Council in the county to handle public education on our behalf. And so, yes, Fire Safe Marin is included in some of the proposals related to public education. And then in addition, we also have a look at kind of where we are in terms of public knowledge and attitudes around these issues. And that would include, public education, but also the defensible space inspection world. And it's a bit more broad. So looking at kind of metrics and how that all works. And that's related to Fire Safe Marin and beyond. So yes, we are working closely with Fire Safe Marin on the public education piece. And then often partner with ecologically sound practices folks for environmental guidance.
Fire Safe Marin will get support then?
Correct.
Okay. And then, but in a previous, just 3 minutes ago, conversation was dealt with that we will go to help out the low-income residents. We will help them out in terms of defensible space for their homes. Is nonprofits in the same entity as lower income?
If I'm understanding your question properly, no, it's low income, it's for the residents, it's not geared towards nonprofit entities.
But there, I remember reading something about nonprofits would get a special look.
There's nothing about that in our JPA language.
Okay, all right, and nothing was on the ballot when it was voted on.
No.
Okay, all right, I stand corrected.
And John, if you have any specific language, or if you find where you read something, feel free to email me, and we can take a look and see what maybe dig into your question a little bit more.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, John. Bill?
Yeah, a follow-up question on the direct assistance for low-income families. It struck me that a really useful data point to collect along the way in reporting on low-income assistance and equity in general would be the properties that are single-family homes and those that are multifamily developments. some of which I know do back onto, wooded areas and have quite extensive landscapes associated with them. And that would be interesting to see, how much of the direct assistance is going to multifamily. It's about 50% of the population, I think, in San Rafael. And so it's a large amount and would include the majority of folks in the lower income brackets as well. So it would be interesting in tracking the equity dimensions of MWPA. Thanks.
Thanks, Bill.
Thanks, Bill. Any other questions or comments? I had one. Well, one, I appreciate the budget being adjusted. It was definitely a sticker shock on my end when I first saw it, just because I think when we're proposing a lot of these core funded JPA-wide programs, I think some of it we didn't 100% understand that it directly affected core funding. So it was definitely a sticker shock on my side. One question I had was in regards to the environmental compliancy, the 750,000 that was in there. I know originally it was in the $1 million range. Is that, or should we anticipate that being an annual expenditure from the JPA? Or is it more just kind of a one-time fund to then start that environmental side of the pot, I should say?
Yeah, that's a great question. So every year that we have new projects proposed that haven't been covered under previous environmental compliance documents, we'll need funding to do the CEQA compliance, sometimes coastal permit work to cover those projects and make sure they can be implemented. This year we went through to try to determine which projects had already gone through the environmental compliance process. So we were able to cut a bit out of the budget based on kind of those estimates. And then even moving forward, we'd like to use the Environmental Compliance Fund to support implementation. So all of the nesting bird surveys that are required, sometimes archaeological surveys, botanical surveys, things like that. So those costs are ongoing during implementation, sometimes depending on the timing of the implementation of the project. But we'd like to incorporate all of that ahead of time so that we're not taking from the implementation budget for projects. We'd like to solidify those budgets for implementing, for contracting with crews, so that folks aren't having to adjust later on after crews are in place, and provide some more certainty in that arena. And then, if we get lucky, right now we may have fewer projects that are new that haven't gone through environmental compliance this year than last, but we're also diving into, more and more complex projects, fewer roadside vegetation management projects that are cheaper, and coastal zone, which is, an order of magnitude more expensive to do anything in the coastal zone. We are looking at streamlining options for that. After meeting with a lot of different folks on it, what that pathway could look like. We've met with Coastal Commission staff, county staff. We've talked with various entities throughout the state actually to see what they're doing and learn from their experiences. So that's the cost. To some extent, it'll be ongoing. And we'll need to budget something to support implementation every year.
Okay, understood. With that, if we were to implement as a JPA-wide some of the recommendations that Todd Lando made, kind of like a programmatic style of projects, are we then able to then reduce some of those environmental compliancy costs because it's already similar to like at the Cal VTP, if we fall within what's already been done with the EIR, then we can then go ahead and implement the work without having to do additional work unless we run across something specific or go outside of that scope of prearranged work.
Yeah, so using the CalVTP EIR as kind of the umbrella document that you tier off of for your projects within your zone or across multiple zones is a great pathway forward. And I think that's something that we'll probably see more and more of. We have a project in Novato now, the Greater Novato Shaded Fuel Break, that will use the CalVTP. And so that seems like a really good path forward. It's implementation related to that can be expensive because you're still doing botanical surveys, potentially nesting bird surveys, and you may need to do archaeological surveys as well as part of project implementation. So the project costs don't go away, but it is a really good programmatic pathway for some of our work. One of the other opportunities we're looking at is how to take some of the smaller projects that are proposed and group them into, single documents so that we're doing maybe fewer documents in all, but covering the same amount of territory. So that's another streamlining option. And if you want to talk CEQA strategy and EIRs and CalVTP, I'd love to have a conversation with you offline. There's a lot to talk about there.
Yeah, absolutely. For us, I think at the fire department level and at the local JPA level is we're trying to get, try to be the most efficient that we possibly can to try to reduce a lot of these redundancies, and which then makes it easier and less cumbersome on each member agency. Because as we remember is most of us all also have full-time responsibilities aside from the time and effort that we put into the success of this agency.
Ruben, just to tag on, the batching the projects is probably, it will be our most efficient way and cost efficient way to do it. And I look at the Greater Ross Valley Shaded Fuel Break, we're estimating $6 million worth of work, right? Mm-hmm. And we had $243,000 for scoping and compliance. So that's way less than that 10% threshold. So you could see that we really did get a return on our investment for that. So the more we can batch these projects in that similar fashion, the better it's going to be for everybody.
Okay. Quinn?
Yes, I remembered one of my other questions, kind of going back to the comment Chief Hilliard had made earlier about kind of meetings to potentially reallocate budget. And then when Mark, you made the comment about trying to get grant money for like the evacuation plan as an example. So if that money did go back into the Corps, just using that one as an example, but can you kind of clarify what that would look like? Like, could it just feed automatically into an already approved project, or would that already approved project get a budget allocation would have to go to the board? Or would it be like a new work plan process, or just what does that look like? If it's one thing, I think when we're already internally reallocating our Corps money, I'm just curious if, a big chunk of change comes back to the Corps.
I think it would be up to each of the Corps zones to decide if they want to propose a new project, and it would simply be a matter of a staff report and presented to the board for approval, or augmenting previously existing projects, but it would not be a full vetting that we've gone through in this way. And we would use the like for the purpose of the evacuation route risk assessment. And if we get that full 350 that we can push back into the Corps zones, we would use the same percentages for the revenue to go back into, and that's how we would push it back into the zones.
And it wouldn't need to stay like under the scope of evacuation as a Corps mission. It could go back into any Corps project.
No, it can go into whatever project you guys decide to push it into.
Thank you for that.
Okay, any other questions for Ann and Mark?
I'll just add that we're also exploring potential funding avenues for some of that coastal zone compliance. So that's a possibility as well.
Okay. Jordan?
Yeah, thanks. Just really quick, we do have some pretty engaged community members, right, that are tracking everything. And just, I know we've had a few people bring it up in conversation, and especially, we have some different scenarios with all our CSAs and all our kind of different tax-based folks that are throughout the county in these different zones. And the kind of original intent of the 80% number that was thrown around, 80% of the Corps needs to be spent back for the percentage amount they're inputting into the system. And I'm wondering, with the new core allocation funds being, taken off the top, when we need to answer when they start looking at these numbers, are we going to say 80% of after everything's taken off at the top, or are we going to use that same number of 80% of the funds that are taken? Does that make sense what I'm asking?
Yeah, Jordan, and what we do for the JPA-wide core projects, we do track which zone that there's expenditures in. So that's it. So it's not just the core projects, the zone core projects that we're looking at for the 80% number. I'll use Chipper Days as an example. We track how much expenditures we have in each of the 5 zones, and that's applied to tracking that 80% threshold. That answer your question?
Yeah. I guess I'm just wondering, just as the new number, and especially for some, an area like West Marin, when people are going to ask where, our core went from, whatever, 696 down to 394, just, that's a pretty high percentage, obviously on a smaller number than most of the areas, just when people are going to start asking, well, where's our 80% of, just how that's all going to play in, just additional funds that are coming off the top. And I think, I can talk people around in circles and confuse them enough, or they'll leave with a smile on their face. But I think, I'm just kind of a little nervous as we move into the future. If the Citizens Oversight Committee and others start kind of looking into that a little farther, what's that 80%, does that include planning? Does that include all these other things, or is it for direct work in these areas?
It's core expenditures, period. So it could be planning, it could be direct work. And like I said, we are tracking the JPA wide projects to make sure we hit that 80% threshold.
Anyone else? Lori, at this time, can we go open it up to the public to see if we have any questions or comments from the audience?
Sure. At this time, would anybody like to speak on this item? Please raise your hand. I see none at this time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lori. We'll bring it back to the committee. Okay, action item 8B. So we're looking for approval of the proposed draft work plan and budget to move forward. Is that what we're looking for, Ann?
Yes, for the operations committee to finalize. Correct.
Okay. Before we do that, any other last final comments or questions before we go ahead and do this? Seeing none, I'd like to entertain a motion to move the project proposals for the 22-23 work plan and the draft budget to the operations committee.
So moved.
So moved by Sleepy Hollow, John Hanley. Can we get a second?
Correct.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Novato.
Second, Novato. May we get a roll call, Lori?
Yes, thank you. Elena Spire.
Aye.
City of San Rafael.
Yes.
Thank you. City of Larkspur.
Yes.
County of Marin.
Yes.
Kentfield Fire.
Yes.
Muir Beach Fire.
Yes.
Novato.
Yes.
Sleepy Hollow Fire.
Yes.
Southern Marin.
Yes.
Simpson Beach.
Yes.
Town of Corte Madera.
Yes.
Excuse me. Town of Fairfax. Absent. Town of Ross.
Yes.
Town of San Anselmo. Absent. City of Mill Valley.
Yes.
Marinwood.
Yes.
Inverness is absent. Passes by unanimous vote of those attending. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori. Want to thank Mark and Ann for all the work that they did, and then an extreme gratitude to everyone that's part of the ATC for all the hard work and putting these work plans together and budgets. I know it's not easy, especially with, like I mentioned earlier, with our full-time positions and roles and responsibilities. But as Mark has stated in the past, is the strength of the agency is within each of our member agencies. And we couldn't be able to be successful without each other. So thank you. And we shall move on to item number 9, which is committee members' requests regarding future agenda items. Do we have a request for future agenda items? Seeing none, I think the only suggestion we had earlier was that maybe set up a meeting, maybe after the fiscal year has started, maybe sometime late summer if time permits, just to kind of touch base again and before the December meetings begin. So that way we can see where we're at as a JPA and where we need to go, and if we need to make any adjustments to the existing budget. We can just consider that. Other than that, we're moving to item number 10. Can I entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting?
I'll give you a motion, Ruben.
Thanks, Rob. Second?
Second.
Second, John Henley. Thank you, everyone. That adjourns the meeting. And good luck out there, and let's get some work done. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Ruben, for all your work.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for leading us. Great job, buddy.